Good afternoon. This is Frank Kosarek, the co-founder at Bizport and the host of the Exit Interview podcast, where we tell the stories of exited founders and share those with the world. Today we have Michael Oxton, former co-founder of Night Shift Brewing, which was sold to the Hendler family brewing company at the end of October in 2024. And today, Michael, we'll dive into your founding story. I will turn the floor over to you to give a quick intro on you, your path, and then let's get deep into the story with Night Shift.
Hey, how's it going? Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. Um, Michael Oxton, yeah, founded Night Shift Brewing in 2012, so a long time ago now. Started it with two friends. It was just a little home brewing hobby that we somehow turned into one of the larger breweries in the Northeast, craft breweries in the Northeast. I like to always make that qualifier because the craft really mattered to us.
Yep,
Sold it in late 2024. The actual official close was actually like January 2025. Um, and have, sort of had a chance to reflect, and I'm excited to talk to you about all the lessons learned.
absolutely. You guys are like the modern day Sam Adams. It seems like you hear all of these craft breweries popping up left and right, and there's a ton of M&A in the space. We at
Yeah.
Bizport actually see a lot of activity in my vertical on the direct to consumer side in food and bev. So your story will be extra relevant to a lot of our prospective sellers. I just want to understand, kind of founding story here. You are one of three co-founders who founded Night Shift out of an apartment somewhere in Boston, I assume, in 2007. Take us back to those days. What did that look like? What was the initial genesis of, hey, let's get together and brew some craft beer? Um,
Yeah, I mean the origin story is very much like, I think like some of the ones you hear about where it's like born of true passion, right? Like we were really into home brewing before we were into like running a business. We were very much just excited to make some beer for ourselves and our friends, and we loved the process. We loved drinking beer, so that helped. And we were just big fans of the industry. And I, I think it just became like we just got obsessive about it. And we turned it from like a chill hobby into an overly complex, overly expensive hobby where, we have more beer than we know what to do with. And we were like, you know, we think this stuff is better than some of the stuff on the shelves out there. So could we sell this? And we had enough people tell us they'd buy it. I don't know if they were right or wrong. Like they they're drinking our homebrew saying I'd
nice
buy it.
friends.
Like you have to believe them to some extent, but you also have to be a little skeptical. Um, but there was enough good feedback that we were like, you know what? Let's give this a shot. Like the barrier to entry in craft beer is not so high that you can't do it with some bootstrap capital. So we found some cheap warehouse space. We found some really cheap, like glorified homebrewing equipment and started at a tiny scale, the three of us doing everything ourselves. And it was very much like, let's just give this a shot. We're all in our early 20s. If it doesn't work out, like we'll go back to our desk jobs. But like we've been brewing at night for 5 years. This was like 2007 to around 2011, 2012. Like let's go in it as the Night Shift Brewers. We'll call ourselves Night Shift Brewing because that's just like the hobby name, and we'll see how it goes.
Very cool. And I'm imagining I've got in my mind's eye an apartment somewhere in Boston with like, yeast piled up in the front hallway and like beer in the bathtub. And like how far is that from the truth?
Our landlord walked in one time. She hadn't been by in a while. It was in Somerville, Josephine Ave in Somerville. And she walked into our apartment and was like so shocked at the state of things because it looked like a mini brewery. She was like, I think I need to change our lease and like write something in about like volume capacity or something because this is insane, guys. Like you're gonna ruin the apartment.
It's not a commercial space. It's not a commercial brewery. And you
Yeah,
guys are
she was
making we're
like, this
making
is
it into that.
outrageous. And she was kind of getting pretty upset with us, but we had a kegerator that had six beers on tap through kegs, and her boyfriend was also with her when she was visiting, and he went over to the kegerator and was like, "Does this thing work?" And we were like, "Yeah." and he pours himself a beer, and he's like, "Ah, come on, let him chill, like let him brew beer." And she was like, "Fine," and like that was it. Like it was cool.
If it didn't taste so good, you guys would have been out, probably.
It would have
You would
been,
have been
yeah, if you had a
evicted.
bad sip, something
That's funny.
nasty. Yeah,
That's funny. So I'm picturing, first three friends kind of brewing craft beer in an apartment, running afoul of their landlord. Like, and then there's a fast forward to where, you know, night shift is a real deal, right? It's
yeah.
there's distribution all over the Northeast. So like, at what point did you stop thinking of yourself as a home brewer and think of yourself as a founder with a mature business that you might be able to scale?
I think, I mean, it's so funny because like that first year just flew by, and we were like driving beer around in our Subarus, dropping it off, brewing every day, like, and you don't. I
It could
think
only be
it felt,
Subarus in the Northeast, right?
of
It could only
course,
be.
yeah. I mean, what else? And I think the first year it felt like wow, the home brewing just took on a whole nother level. And obviously it was a business, and like we had like contracts with our lawyers, and we did all the we formed the corporation, all that stuff, right? But like it still felt like, man, we're just like we're having fun, we're doing this, and like we'll see how it goes. I think once we realized like, wow, this is it's taking off, right? And people are buying it at like a clip we can't keep up with, and we really wanted to fuel growth. And the only way to do that was really to ultimately take on, like, we decided we didn't want to raise money and sell equity. So we applied for like a loan through mass development, which is like a really like great program for small businesses. And so we had to like be underwritten and like apply for a loan. And like I was like on calls with bankers and like trying to like talk about projections and debt capacity. And suddenly I'm like, wow, this got real.
We might be real now that banks think we're a real business.
Yeah, that was one like
Interesting.
reality check. Yeah.
Interesting. And so you're raising debt from a credit union or a Massachusetts state credit union. What's the debt for? What are the big
Yeah.
purchases? What's going through your head at this time?
So that one was actually that was a pretty big one. And the nice thing about like manufacturing is that you're buying a lot of like assets that you can sell at a later time. Like stainless steel tanks you can sell, right? So like the bank has those as like assets. So like it that helped, I think. But some of it was equipment purchasing, and then some of it was leasehold improvements on a giant build out. So we wanted to move from one space in Everett to another space that was much larger because we basically shifted our whole business model from like what we thought was going to be mostly wholesale to pretty much a 50-50 split between wholesale focus and like D2C tap room focus. People come to us. And the margins there were so insane and the demand was so big that like we really wanted to take this 90 square foot tap room that was constantly just like filled out the door and turn it into like a 2,000 square foot like experience, right? For people to come and kind of like have a destination. So to fund that, we needed some bank capital.
Got it.
And that's how we went about it. Yeah.
And kind of where were sales at this point?
Oh man. I mean, let's see. Our first year, I think we sold like 250K. We did a 250K of sales, and then it was like 750, and then it was like 1.4, and then it was like 4. It was like it was
Escape
insane. It
velocity.
was yeah, it was like 4 and then 8. It was like almost doubling or more every year for like I mean, when you're that small too, it's not like like it wasn't that much harder to like double our capacity from a tiny amount to a little bit more of that when we
Yeah.
were in the very early stages. Yeah.
I think we call that product market fit, when you
Yeah.
have so much demand, you literally don't know what to do with yourself. And that sounds like it
Yeah.
from the sales trajectory. And so somewhere along the line, also, you decided to start a distribution company, right? Night Shift Distribution. Walk me through the logic there and what the founding story for that, concept was.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of like it fits seamlessly with like the growth path, which was like we went from very, very small distributing out of our Subaru to like medium size, right? Like a decent size for a small brewery. And in Massachusetts, there's a distribution law that basically is like under the license that we had, you cannot self distribute. do it yourselves with that license beyond a certain capacity of barrels produced per year, or barrels sold per year. And we hit that capacity, or we were about to hit it, and we were like, well, at this point, we're gonna either have to like stop our growth, right? And literally just like stay at that ceiling and just only distribute at like that capped volume. Or you need to sell the rest of the volume to a distributor. And we just, at that point, we were not ready to jump in bed with a distributor. Um, we didn't know them well enough. And we also just like, we love the margins that you keep when you self distribute, because you're not paying a 30% cut to someone. And we like the relationships we had. Like I mean, your sales relationship, like they're your customer. If it's not the person actually buying the beer, it's the person buying the beer for the person buying the beer. So that was a really important relationship for us. And mass laws also suck, and you can't get out of distributor relationships if you don't like them without a lengthy court process. So for many reasons, we were like, you know what? Let's come up with a different solution here. We'll create a company called Night Shift Distributing. Uh, Separate LLC. We will sell beer from Night Shift Brewing to Night Shift Distributing, and that company will distribute the beer. Legally, it's completely fine, and it ended up being awesome because all the things we wanted to protect were protected, right? The margins, the relationships, all that. And what ended up being kind of interesting is like we quickly learned, well, we make more money if we drop off more stuff per stop when we're delivering beer. And so if I'm dropping off just night shift beer, well, that's good. But if I'm dropping off night shift beer plus maybe like five other breweries, plus maybe a spirits brand and a wine brand, well, that's even better. So we quickly just were like, how do we fill our portfolio within the distributing company so that we can be more efficient per drop and sort of like market ourselves as this craft beverage distributing company?
Very cool. I think that's called vertical integration, right? Where you
I
own
think
all
that's it.
parts of something like that.
We weren't thinking that smart at the time. We were just like, how do we continue growing our distributing without self-sabotage?
I would say contained within that decision to start a distribution company, I'm guessing you guys had to go out and establish your own distribution contacts, right? Buyers at big box retailers, Wegmans, et cetera. Like, did you
It
guys have
became,
a
yeah.
background in that? Did you have connections?
No. We didn't. I was sort of like our sales guy for the first couple years and like built the sales team. Like that is a generous term, but like I figured out I established our relationships early on, right? And so I had a lay of the land for like how we sell our beer, what works, what doesn't, and like a good enough sense of our sales process. Um, After which point we really, I mean, this is where when you're big enough, like, and if you're lucky enough to have, the resources to do it, you hire people that are even better than you. So I hired a sales team and a sales director, and we had like amazing people who, were able to create great relationships with Whole Foods and Wegmans and Trader Joe's and Total Wines, and you know, that all came from amazing people we hired. Not like helped facilitate a lot of it and like led the charge sometimes, but very much relied on the expertise of other people to build out that and really make ourselves like we grew. I mean, the distributing company grew like crazy with that team in place.
Very interesting. I think between the two companies went very well to the point where you guys distributed something like, what is it, 38,000, over 38,000 barrels of beer in 2021 at a peak, right? Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it became like we were one of the larger breweries in the state. We became much bigger than I think we ever thought we were going to be.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's it's interesting how that became, a real business from like a bedroom experiment. And the fact that the distribution was handled too meant, I mean, no dependencies, right? And from an M&A perspective, we always think about like, you know, if you're making a product, but you've got to rely on a third party or pay a third party to get that into your consumers' hands, well, that is a platform risk, right? If that relationship changes, there go my unit economics. But the fact that you owned all of that together, I assume, is part of the reason you're sitting here now as an exited founder, and not someone still in the brewing world. Um,
Yeah, I think that's true.
mhm, mhm.
The Yeah, it got interesting only because at a certain point you're making interesting decisions like next month, do we need to focus on buying more tanks or do we need to focus on buying more box trucks? Like, you know, the tanks for the brewery, the box trucks for the distributing company. And it did become like a real split focus, which is one of the reasons we ended up selling it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And it sounds like there were some challenges along the way. I understand that you guys had a brewing facility in Everett, Mass, which was heavily financed, right? This was maybe a
Correct.
$10+ million build out for
Correct.
you all. And it sounds to me like the co-founders here couldn't really unlock the full economies of scale from that facility at some point. So walk us through kind of the lead up to that and the decision making process to kind of rectify the issue there.
Yeah. I mean, it was like a bunch of things all at once, right? So let's see. I'm just thinking back to like imagine like 2019, right? We're capacity constrained out of our Everett facility, where we're trying to brew as much as possible. And we're like, how do we grow more and produce more beer? And at this point, we were starting to look at other facilities in and out of state where we were like, well, let's find a giant warehouse because our Everett place was amazing for foot traffic, or foot traffic wasn't great, but amazing for like getting people there because it's close to Boston and good parking. But as a facility, just like awkward footprint, lower ceilings, like you just can't go crazy with like huge brewing production there. So for many reasons, we were like, we need a new space. We found one in Philadelphia, actually, and two of our founders were from Philly. I'm from Boston, but they were like, "Hey, let's move a giant portion of our production down to Philly. We'll build out like the mega brewery, and we'll produce way more out of there more efficiently." Um, Found a space, signed a lease. We were like ready to rock. 2020, COVID hits, and we're suddenly like, "Shit, what do we do?" So ultimately, we did not do any of that. We got out of the lease. We had to pay to get out of the lease. So, like, it was a few $100,000 that sucked to have to pay, but it wasn't a 15 to $20 million brewery build out that it would have been down in Philadelphia, possibly more over time. And I mean, honestly, it was like such a blessing in disguise that we didn't do that, um, because we were about to, and instead we doubled down on some equipment upgrades in Everett. It made us a little bit more efficient, and we did start thinking longer term about like how do we shift some of our production out of house and into the hands of a contract facility that can make beer that's just as good as ours at the same specs that we want, but more cheaply.
Interesting. So kind of blessing in disguise, right? For you guys to
100% was a blessing in
outsource.
disguise.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and contract manufacturing, as long as you can maintain like a high quality standard, from an M&A perspective too, it's difficult to say, hey, Michael, you and your co-founders are our core dependency here, and if we can't
Yeah,
strike a deal with you for the foreseeable, the
yeah.
production of the company is jeopardized. Much easier to say, hey, we've got a third party. Here are the contract terms. They're not emotional about this. Of course, there's that challenge. It sounds like there was also a major CO2 shortage that you guys dealt with
That was
post
a little
COVID.
bit later, but yeah, that was when we had shifted some production to a few different facilities. We had a couple of different contract manufacturers to kind of like spread ourselves out. And we were also making beer out of Everett. So it was like some produced in-house, some produced out of house. It was like more than 50% in-house though. And like there was like I think it was from the COVID supply chain. Our CO2 supplier calls us one day and he's like, "Listen, we're out of CO2 for like at least a month, and we don't know when we're going to get more." And like like no one we called around and it was like there's no options to get more. And like if you run out of CO2, you run out of beer because like that's how we use to carbonate our beer to push beer from tank. Like if you're in beer, like CO2 is your lifeblood. So that and water. Uh, and so it was like, shit, what do we do? And it was sort of a problem that had been building anyway because we had a capacity constrained building that was inefficient. So ultimately, we were like, let's just move way more production out of house to a different facility, and that's what we ended up doing. And honestly, like, I mean, it sucked because we had to cut some of our production staff, and it sucked to just like not make our own beer in house because that was cool. But at the same time, putting about 90% of our production in the hands of a contract manufacturer long term turned out to be a blessing. And we still did R&D out of a different facility that we owned.
Right. So, and then at some point, you guys are off to the races. You have your own distribution company. At one point, doing almost 40,000 barrels a year. Everything's run by a third party, and at some point, Hendler family approaches you guys. So walk us through how that relationship started. Was that always the plan? How do you kick off a conversation that leads to an exit of that kind of magnitude?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is that so we sold the distribution company in 2021, and that was a big deal, right? That was us selling our brand rights to one specific distributor, and I'm not going to go into all the terms, but like they pay a pretty good multiple on revenue. For us, like it erased all of the debt we'd accumulated over the years, just putting together our facility. So like it was really good for that. It was good in that like it allowed us to sort of like fund the build or the continuous build out of our Boston location, which sort of has become like a flagship spot. And then the final thing it did was it does lock you into a long-term distributor relationship. So as a brand, after that point, we are only working through that distributor. Which, when you go to sell the business at some point, if you do, you need to be thinking like, well, who's interested in working with this specific distributing network and not any of the other ones because they'd have to pay to get out of it. So once I will say Hendler, they didn't really approach us. It became sort of like a decision that we made as a founding team first, which was kind of like, I don't know, we've been at it for 14 years, 13 years. And I felt like we were all kind of like, we've had a really good run and like the business is in a pretty good spot. And there was definitely some writing on the wall that like maybe the industry was starting to go through some turmoil. And like we had sort of peaked our production in 2021, but like like it wasn't like we were declining so fast that we were like, oh my God, like this thing's on fire. But it was definitely like, hey, like we can probably put this brand into the hands of a company that's like trying to grow a portfolio of businesses and really focus on like large scale sales, distribution, and production. We had at that point sort of like our assets were really hospitality, marketing, and sales. Like those were like our main functions. And I think we wanted an exit, right? So we started talking around and we had many discussions with like a bunch of potential acquirers. Um, and the ones that ended up being, the ones who we technically merged with them, but like, whatever. It was just like the legal format. But they ended up being the ones who were contract manufacturing our beer. The Hendler family company, whose main brand that they own is Jack's Abbey.
Got it. So they've already had an existing relationship with you guys, knew how to manufacture your product. It's a pretty easy conversation to say, hey, would you guys ever sell the brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a Charlie Munger quote that's like, "Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome." And it's
I
like
like that one.
they were heavily incentivized, and it was a wonderful relationship. Like they were really good people. They were incentivized heavily to keep us in house because they were already making the beer. We were in the same distribution network, so for like many reasons, it lined up really well, and we agreed on like terms that we were all really pumped about, and um, I mean, honestly, like maybe the best part of the exit, like from like a personal perspective, was that they retained like 98% of the staff or something. And just like they're doing the brand justice. They're keeping the team mostly intact. Like they're carrying forward what we built in the way that I'm like proud of.
How do you think about, of course, there's headline price, there's deal structure when you're exiting, all these things are important, but from our experience, you could have two identical offers, same headline price, and a seller sometimes has heavy preference for one over the other. And you want to open up their head and say, hey, what's going on here? Like what's driving, what do I not know about? So what was kind of your rank order, you and your co-founders, as it related to, what type of acquirer do we look for? And then what sort of transaction terms make sense for us?
Totally. Um, Money talks, right? So like there was a certain threshold where we're just like, we talked to some potential acquirers where it was just like, all right, the multiple is just not going to be there. They're not that incentivized to get a craft brewery like some PE firms or something. Like it was just like, yeah, they'd throw a bone at it, but like no. So you do have like a price threshold, and then I think you know once you get like sort of into an area where it's like, okay, this feels comfortable, this is kind of like in our ballpark, it really comes down to um, what are the terms of that that deal, right? Like what are the things that actually make it go from like, red to yellow to green? Because that all those little loopholes can really add up and cause friction. And then also just like who are the people that you're that's more than anything. It's like who are these people? Do I trust them? Do I like them? Um and it I mean, we were fortunate in that like we were talking to some parties and like everyone's like good people that we were talking to. So we had like good trust, but like ultimately settling with the Hendler family group was just it's very much a vote of confidence and like I think these people are gonna like be true to their word. They're not gonna try and pull out some like weird antics at the very end of this deal to mess things up. Like you never know, and you hear nightmare stories, but like, do these people have integrity? Is like kind of a big question you have to ask.
Right. And the fact that, what did you say, 98% of your team was retained post
Yeah,
close. I assume, was there any representation? Did Hendler say, look, we're not gonna slash and burn your team? Like, how did you know that was going to happen, or did you know?
it was a long process. It was a I think we started the conversation with them in like February or March, and the deal closed the following January. So like it was a long process to get there, but we had many conversations along the way that were just sort of like, are you like, are you going to cut everyone, or who are you keeping? Once we sort of finalized like the PNS and everything, like there was very much like, yeah, like there was confidence given that like they're going to keep most people, and like I mean, obviously they could have gone back on it, or like they could have done whatever they wanted, but like no, they didn't.
It sounds like you wrote out your transition period, kind of helped Hendler get into the driver's seat and then said, you know what, pause, we're going to duck out. Um, was that always the plan? You hear about these
Yeah.
folks who love being their own bosses, love managing all the decisions themselves, and then you bring in effectively the bosses to the room, and it feels different. So I'm curious.
Once we decided to sort of pursue an exit and sell the company, and like that decision was made, I mean, I want to find an acquirer that will like assume all the responsibility. I do not want to stay involved post acquisition. I got plenty of potential ideas and things I want to do, and like they don't all involve beer. So like that for me, it was very much like I want to get out. Um, And I think, well, one of our founders, Mike, he had already sort of stepped back a little bit. So for him, I don't think it was a huge question mark either. Like he was, um, by the end, was fairly uninvolved. And Rob, our other co-founder, he was, I think, it maybe like hit him the hard emotionally. And I think, it was like it was our baby collectively, right? But it was probably his the most. He had like moved to Everett to be next to the brewery at one point. Like his wife worked for the brewery. I think like it was maybe just like slightly more like, damn, this is going to be really hard to leave. But like he also, I know, ultimately wanted like to go on to do something entrepreneurial and different, which he's doing now. So we were all sort of separately, I think, ultimately planning to get out. And I know also that like the Hendler family company, like they were like, we can't afford to have you guys all on once we acquire this. So
It's
like
practical too,
there sadly won't be roles, and we were
for
like
sure.
fine with that. Yeah,
For sure. Yeah, I think that's a common founder disposition where they say, I will make sure the brand continues to stand up. But, from my own experience and from talking to folks like you all the time, there's an itch you can't quite scratch as a W-2 of a larger acquirer. And sometimes you got to go back to the drawing board.
yeah.
Part of that process for you that was personally hard. Sounds like your co-founder Rob had a strong emotional connection to the brand. Was was that the same for you? Was that difficult on your end?
I said it already that like it was a long process, right? And so like it was interesting in that like emotionally like no, we didn't stay on post exit, meaning we didn't stay on after like January 2025, but like we announced that we were doing this like midsummer of 2024. So I kind of had like 6 months to wind things down with the team and like I it was like it was a pretty good process in terms of like feeling like I kind of like got to go through the motions of like exiting with like all of my boxes checked and getting things that I wanted to done. Um, so like by the time we really like finished the deal in January, I was pretty good to like just do my own thing. But like what was really interesting is like I would say like 3, 4 months after that I was suddenly like, oh my God, like I'm not the founder of Night Shift Brewing anymore in the way that I was. Like I'll always be the founder of Night Shift Brewing, but like I'm not running that company. And it's, it's like you're always, you tie it to like your identity in a way you don't realize until suddenly it's missing. And I did have like, I would say like a 3 to 4 month period where I was like, that sucks. Like I missed that, and I didn't miss like the day to day being in it. Like I was glad to be done, but I did miss like the identity piece, and it takes a little bit of like mental gymnastics to sort of figure out like, all right, this is what I'm going to be afterwards, and like this is how I'm going to think about whatever. I don't know if you can prepare for that.
And I think that's probably why a lot of folks do what you all did, where you get back into the driver's seat of something new, right? It's once you've made it,
Yeah,
it's not as interesting, right? Um,
yeah,
and so, curious, do you
yeah,
wish you had sold earlier when the writing wasn't so on the wall, or was the timing right? Give us a sense of timing there.
yeah. I mean, I think you can always like. I mean, if you're gonna go back and sell a craft brewery at any point in time, like I don't know, like summer of 2018 or something, like I have no idea, but like that's probably like where you can max out, right? But at the same time, I'm like, well, I didn't do it, and like I learned a ton throughout the whole process, and like I mean, I we probably sold our distribution company at like peak value in 2021. Very likely. And so that was like about as well timed as it could have been. And I think like our exit for the brewery was not like peak positioning, but it was also I was like very happy with the exit terms and like feel good enough about it where I have no like, oh, I wish we had. Um so no, I mean I think like the stuff we learned along the way throughout the whole process from beginning of the brewery to the end for us was like way more valuable than like optimizing a few extra multiples or whatever on like that value. It just no, not in that
Made
sense.
sense. And you guys sort of had a
Yeah,
dual exit too, where you exited the distribution company at peak value, and then the brewery exit was sort of cherry on top, even though that by itself sounds like it was a compelling
yeah,
valuation for you.
yeah. I'd be happy enough with the brewery one, but the distribution one having happened was like, all right, like that was a like I think I'd have a different answer if we hadn't done that.
Makes sense. And you hear about M&A in the food and bev space, especially within craft breweries, mid 2010s ish to late 2010s. But let's say someone's building a food and bev brand today and wants to sell it either to a strategic kind of like you all, or maybe a private equity, or maybe even making it public. What's your advice for someone kind of aspiring to do that down the line?
Um, um, it's a really highly competitive space. Um, you like the trend is your friend, right? And like it's helpful to some extent to be thinking about, am I entering this industry at a time where things are trending in some sort of upward direction, and do they seem likely to continue to do so? You can't crystal ball it. I would never recommend anyone start a craft brewery right now because I just think like it's a saturated industry. It's going through like, you know, highs and lows, and like it's probably in a bit of a low. So like you have to time it right to some extent. So like that's one sort of box I think you have to check. And then the other thing I'd say is like do as much yourself as possible for as long as possible, but not at the expense of growth. So like we did literally every aspect of the business, maybe besides the legal stuff. We hired a lawyer. That was smart. But like outside of that, we did almost everything. And so when you go to hire and you go to grow, like you know all your pain points and you know what you need to hire for, and like you can solve towards that stuff. But I think if you outsource too quickly, and you don't know what your friction points are, and you don't know your customer from the very beginning, it's like it's really hard to figure that out later. And I think you can quickly stumble.
Absolutely. And was there anything in particular you all did when you said, the three founders stacked hands and said, we're exploring an exit? What's like the first step there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think like throughout the whole time, I mean, maybe like not the first 5 to 6 years, but after that, I think every year or so, it's healthy to have like a check-in, which we did, which is sort of like, hey, do we want to sell or are we good? Like, and every year it was kind of like, we're good, we're good, we're good. And then I think like 2023, 2024, it was kind of like, maybe we want to sell. Like, I think maybe we're in a position where like we feel like we've checked off enough of our boxes and like the business is in a position where it's like, it would be a good business to sell and it's structured in a right way and like we have the opportunity to do this and it makes sense. And so um it was like many conversations, I think, like over the course of years. And I feel like if you get used to having that dialogue, it's almost smarter than like suddenly trying to have all the conversations all at once and like maybe we need to exit and like let's figure this out.
Very interesting. So keep a tab on your team's willingness to exit
Yeah.
at all
And always
times.
be open, right? Like
Always
always
be
be
open to it.
open. I, at the very least, we were always having conversations with parties that, if it wasn't like an acquiring party, we were always talking to like brokers and like people who knew the M&A space and could sort of give us information on it because you want to know just like how are the multiples changing? Like what are people valuing? What do they care about? And it's like if you think that you're going to run your business for 100 years and never have an exit, like I think that's a great potential goal to have, but you should also always be open to the fact that it might be always better to sell. Like run for 100 years, but also be able to pivot if you need to.
And closing question for you, Michael. And this is a question I always like to ask founders. How much of your success with Night Shift and your co-founders as well is due to your unique work ethic, skill set, kind of management capability and knowledge of craft brewing? And then how much of it is attributable just to pure dumb luck?
It's a great question. Oh man, I think like honestly, the answer is probably like a ton of success of it is attributable early on, and then I would start stripping it away because we like I would give more and more credit to the people we hired, you know. So like we put a ton of like whatever you want to call it, like grit, sweat, blood, whatever, into like the first 5 years of building that business where we were like all in and doing pretty much everything. um, and then we started hiring really good, smart people to help us do the rest. And like, I'll take some credit for hiring those people, but at a certain point, like, you have to sort of step back and like let those people do their jobs really well. And then, so then I give way more credit then to like the people that sort of helped us like succeed, like our bartenders that made amazing guest experiences that racked up like 5-star reviews on Google. Like, that is a huge attributor to success if you compound that over many years. So like I had nothing to do with that. I helped try and set the culture a little bit, but like I think at that point it is really like after year 10 or whatever, it's like stewardship, and I'll take some level of credit, shared with my co-founders. Like I think we all did it together. It was definitely an equal sharing of like responsibility. Um, but I would distance myself from like being able to take too much credit by the end because I think so much can go back to the team. Um, when we sold the business, we each roughly owned about 27% of the business, right? And I'll take credit for us not having given up a ton of equity early on, which allowed us to control our destiny for a really long time and make decisions that were in the best interest of our staff, of our brand, of things that like really mattered to us. Like we made a bunch of dumb financial decisions that were good for like 401ks or whatever, right? And like stuff that a PE firm that like maybe had come in really early would not prioritize that we did. Like that's just one example. um, or they would, but like we don't know those things, and so those question marks we were able to eliminate because we controlled the business.
Makes sense. To maintain control and then also delegate as much as possible to smart people, right? And
Yeah,
that component is probably your unique judgment more so than it is pure luck, right? Your judgment was to say maintain control and trust the experts.
I would say no egos in the room. That is like, I don't know. There's got to be some, there's like the three founders, and then like the people we hired, like the ones that stayed with us and succeeded were like low ego people, and the three of us, I think, were like pretty low ego, and we really prioritized like, you know, that let's make the right decision, not my decision. And I do think like generally speaking, that works out better than the opposite.
For sure. Yeah, it can look like luck, but it's actually not. Michael,
Yeah.
before we drop, I know you're working on something new. Um, anything you can share or would like to share?
I'll give it a quick little nod. But it's an awesome new startup. I joined as co-founder, but I can't take credit for the science side at all. But I basically I spent time after Night Shift looking for another sort of like place to start a journey, and um, sort of lucked my way into finding this guy Faison, who had started this company called Everfur, which is really like focused on pet health and pet health intelligence, and um, sort of combines like this patent pending fur health test with sort of an AI backbone that we're building that allows people to really like have a very personalized pet health experience where they can monitor, track their dog's health and cats eventually. So yeah, I'm co-founder, chief business officer there, and I'm like 6 months into it. It's amazing. It's moving really fast. It's obviously in a completely different industry. So like right now my job is like networking as much as it is anything else because I'm just like learning stuff. But it's a cool industry. It's moving fast, and I don't know. I kind of feel like I'm back to like what I love the most about Night Shift, which is like small team, moving quickly, doing a ton on your own, making decisions quickly, and like we'll see where it goes from here. It's pretty sweet.
Congratulations. Well, this has been a fantastic episode of the Exit Interview by Bizport. Michael Oxton from Night Shift Brewing, thank you for joining and for your transparency.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Take care.